Hello and welcome to Letters Home, a story of a World War II B-17 pilot from Lowell, Michigan, in his own words. And he just so happens to be my grandpa. I'm your host, Annie Whitlock, and I'm joined by my co-host, my dad, Mitch McMahon, and my aunt, Lori Summerfield.
In each episode of Letters Home, we're going to dive into letters written by my dad during his time in World War II that he sent to his parents, siblings, and friends back home in Lowell, Michigan. We'll be reading his own words and giving some context as to what was happening in the world and in Lowell at the time that he wrote these.
In this episode, we talk about Bruce's new camp at Rankin Field and his admiration for the brand new Golden Gate Bridge.
The brand new. All right. Well, before we get into it, it's time for our corrections and additions segment. And we've always said that we want podcast listeners to submit things for this segment. And today we have one of these listeners here to fill some gaps. Please welcome our very special guest, Bruce's niece, Gail. Welcome, Gail.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Gail.
I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad.
It's exciting to be here.
We're
Thank
happy
you.
to have you here. Tell us a little bit about how you're related to Bruce so that our listeners know where you fit into the story.
Well, he's my Uncle Bruce, and I always had a big crush on him as a little girl. I probably shouldn't admit that, but I was the youngest when he went off to war, and so when he came home, he made a big fuss over the youngest member in the family, and I always thought he was very special.
Oh, that's awesome.
That
That's
is
awesome.
so cute. So who are your parents?
Roger and Veda.
Okay.
And my dad, Roger, was the oldest brother, older, and Bruce. So
Yeah, okay. And then who are your siblings?
my older brother, Roger, who has passed on, and then my younger brother, Frank, and he lives here in Lowell.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, we talked about Veda last week and kind of where, because Bruce had mentioned her in some letters. And so we thought we had to fill in to the listeners who that was. And so, yeah, so that is your mom.
Yes.
The reason why we were talking about Veda last week on the podcast last episode was because Bruce had written in one of his letters back that there was good news about Veda that would keep everybody's mind off the war, but that maybe it wouldn't worry them too much. And the only thing we could think of was that she was pregnant, because what would be good news but still maybe you would worry about? But that wasn't you, because you said you were already born.
Yes.
And that's when I talked to Kathy and your daughter and said, well, when was Frank or Butch, when was he born? And so then we figured it all out. The timeline works out just perfect.
Yes.
So that would be your younger brother.
My younger brother, he's 4 years younger than me. I was born in 1938. He was born, and I'm not sure if it was 43 or 44.
I think maybe 43.
Must be 43 if this is
If this is
if
what
this
we're
is
talking
what
about.
we're talking
If the
about. See,
letters
half
are
of this
correct. Yep.
Okay.
half of this podcast is us guessing about a lot of things that we hear, see, or read Bruce write about, and we're just like, well, maybe that was that.
It was my younger brother, Francis Joseph McMahon. He was probably born in 43.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
awesome. That's so great. So what memories do you have of your Uncle Bruce?
Well, again, I was very young, so I won't get dates right. So these are
That's
just
okay.
memories. But I remember him coming home. I'd had my tonsils taken out, and it was during the war, so they were taken out in the doctor's office when I was 4 years old in Lowell, above the drugstore. The doctor was a personal friend, and so I went home to recover. And I remember Uncle Bruce coming in. I was so excited. And so, he was probably in the service. I just don't really know where he came from, but all of a sudden he's there. And he brought me a chocolate malted, because that's what you do when you have your tonsils
Sure.
out.
Yeah.
Well, I
That
was
tracks.
very excited about it, had them all. Uncle Bruce is here, and I took a sip, and it was chocolate. And I don't like chocolate. I wanted strawberry. So I know I teared up, and everyone thought it was because my throat was hurting so bad. But it was really because Uncle Bruce brought me chocolate and not strawberry. But I was just so happy to see him. And I'll never forget that memory that he came in and brought me a malted.
Oh, that's
Wow.
awesome.
That is so cool. That is so great. Did he ever talk about the war to you all?
My older brother Roger and Uncle Bruce were very close, because my brother Roger was in the service, the Air Force, for many years. And they would get together every time they came home, and they talked about it. But I really wasn't privy to any of those talks.
Yeah, we're
Oh,
finding
so
that
when
out.
Bruce would write in his letters about not wanting Roger to go to the war, I assumed he was talking about his own brother.
Oh,
your
he was.
dad.
He was.
Okay.
He was.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have been. Well, my brother went in. I don't remember when. I don't think we were at war when Roger was in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We call your brother Little Roger at our house, but it's probably
Little Roger. Dad called him Roddy. Oh. And apparently that's kind of a nickname for Roger.
Okay. I didn't know that.
He called him Roddy. He mentions him in his letters.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Oh, that's cool.
Wow.
So cool.
And you have letters here too.
I do. They were very, very prolific. Both my dad and Uncle Bruce. They wrote home all the time, and the letters are just absolutely precious. And I didn't know they existed. I think Lori found them. Mm-hmm. And they've been just so precious to me because my dad died when I was just 15.
Yeah.
And some of those letters that he wrote at that time really helps me understand him and what was going on during the war. So, yes, I have a lot of them that he wrote home, which was really neat because both Bruce and Dad would just say Lowell, Michigan.
Yeah.
No address.
Yeah.
No zip code. Just Lowell, Michigan. And everybody knew who. And
Yeah.
then they did go and put Reservoir Hill on them.
Yeah, Annie mentioned that in
Yeah.
one of our first podcasts.
Yeah, I
Like,
noticed
that's
there
just
was
amazing.
no house number. It was just Frank McMahon, Lowell. That was it.
Yep.
Everyone just knew where
So,
he
yeah.
needed to go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, yeah, you have to start your own podcast now with your dad's letters.
Yeah, they meant a lot to
You're
me.
gonna have a spin-off. How to go? Is there anything else you remember about Bruce that you want to mention?
Well, again, this is just my own personal memory, and I don't remember the time, but he used to take me up in the airplane when I was quite little, maybe 4 or 5, and I don't have the times just right. If it was after the war, it probably was, and it was right out of the little Lowell airport, and so I had my first flight when I was about 4 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yes, and I always adored him, and I always had a crush on him. He was the nicest, handsomest man ever.
Oh, you're so
Yeah.
sweet. Thank you.
Aw,
Thank
that
you
is
so
so
much for
great.
coming in today.
Yeah.
We really
Yes,
appreciate
it's
it.
been really awesome to have you here. Thank you, Gail.
Oh,
Thanks
you're
for
so
filling in
welcome.
the gaps for us.
You're welcome.
All right, we have a few more corrections and additions. And so we're going to welcome our next guest, which is our historian, as always, Dale Croft. Welcome, Dale.
Well, I'm
All right.
back
and
again.
you have some additions for us as well, things
Yes.
we talked about last time.
Yep. Yes, I do. One is about the Fairbanks. Mitch in one of the episodes at the end. We got a new mystery, Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Well, from what I understand, the Fairbanks were the generators that were pulled out of the old powerhouse when they got rid of them.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
There was an article in the Ledger that Mark told me about. He says that's where they read about it. So I guess maybe if we double checked it, it might be. But that's supposedly.
So-
That's for another listener to do.
Yeah. maybe.
Probably a big job, I would guess,
Yeah.
to take those
Oh,
out
yeah.
and replace them. So makes sense that Bruce
That's
would
the
write
only
about
thing
it.
that kept me warm, though, walking to school every morning, going past those windows with the Fairbanks running.
Oh, yeah.
The heat coming through the glass on
That's
those. You warmed up a little bit before you made the corner to go across the river to school.
All right.
And then the other update was on Percy Reed. He owned the bait shop. Him and his wife, Ethel Reed, owned the bait shop on Murray Lake back in the early 1900s. And they also rented out the rowboats and stuff for. They had rowboats that you could rent and row around Murray
Okay.
Lake before wave boats come around.
That's great. Well, we got some mysteries solved for us too. So remember that if any listeners have a correction or an addition for us, more information, anything, please comment or message us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, and we will bring it up in a future episode. So let's get into our latest letters from Bruce. In this episode, Bruce is no longer at Santa Ana. We have a new setting, a new location for Bruce's life, where he has arrived now at Rankin Field in Tulare, California, and he is now in what we call primary flying school. A lot of his letters from Rankin Field at first are describing what things are like there. So Dale, why don't you tell us a little bit about Rankin Field in general? What is it like there?
Rankin Field was the Aeronautical Academy. It was important during World War II because it trained pilots for the U.S. Army Air Corps under a government contract. The academy was founded in 1941 by John Gilbert Tex Rankin, who was an acrobatic pilot, a barnstormer, an air racer, and a flight instructor from the 1920s up to the 1940s. The Academy's mission was to train civilian cadets to be the best pilots possible, and its course was highly demanding, with many cadets failing to complete it successfully. The airfield was an all-direction turf soil surface consisting of a 2,300-foot by a 1,800-foot rectangular landing and takeoff field. It had a total of 5 auxiliary airfields for emergency and overflow landings and takeoffs. During its 54 months of operation, the Academy trained over, get this, 10,450 cadets, including 12 World War II aces. Graduates included Richard Bong, the U.S. all-time leading ace and Medal of Honor recipient, and Elray Jeppesen, the founder of the Jeppesen navigation maps. The Academy closed at the end of World War II, and the airfield was inactivated on September 30th, 1945. Now, the Jeppesen charts are aeronautical charts used by pilots for flight planning and navigation. They are considered a key part of modern aviation navigation. Jeppesen's charts were used by over 1 million pilots worldwide today. So we had 2 very important, about 10,000 cadets.
Are those charts what you decorated your bedroom with as a kid, Dad?
Yeah. I don't know if Bruce had any of those or not, but I'm sure he did when he was flying over Europe.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah, it's very competitive. That's right. It was a competitive flight school.
And remember, he had to do how many? I think it was 175 landings, right? 60 hours of flight. So they needed those auxiliary fields, especially for emergency landings and stuff when some of the things didn't go right.
All right. So let's hear what Bruce thought about his new digs at Rankin Field. So we're going to start with a letter from Tuesday, August 4th, 1942, in his own words.
Tuesday. Dear folks, well, this is the first free moment I've had since arriving, so I'll take advantage of it and try to tell you of my new camp. The camp is swell. The rooms are like hotel rooms. 3-quarter beds with inner spring mattresses, individual oak writing tables, super air conditioning. The temperatures go to 110 outside. 12 individual wash bowls and showers. It is really very nice. Discipline is also very rigid here. But with these surroundings, you can put up with a lot of discipline. The mess hall is just like the dining room of an exclusive hotel. Girls' wait table, the food is good. There are about 425 cadets on the field and about 200 steerman trainers to fly. Everyone has a pith helmet and must wear it when we are out of doors. This sounds like it's terribly hot. Well, it is, but our rooms are kept cool at night, and you sleep very comfortably, though the temperature may be 85 at midnight. There won't be near as much time to write, but every spare moment I have will be used in writing you letters. This week will be especially busy, but I hope you have more time next week. We have to get settled and learn the ropes around here, how they make their beds here, pack the food lockers, etc.
Wow. So right off the bat, this sounds very different from the Santa Ana Air Force Base in a lot of ways, but I want to know what a pith helmet is. Dale, do you know? Did you find out?
Yes, I
Of
did.
course.
Of course he did.
A pith helmet is a lightweight, hard-shelled hat with a wide, sloping brim and a high crown that is designed to protect the wearer's head and face from the sun. It is also known as solar toupee, topi, or safari helmet.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks a little like a safari helmet.
Yeah, most all of us know it's a safari helmet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pith helmets are originally made from the dry pith or cork of swamp plants in India, and there was a genus species name, which I'm not even going to attempt to say, such as the sola plant. That's a common name. However, they can also be made from other lightweight materials that shade the sun, such as rattan or fiber. Original pith helmets often have air vents on the top, sides, and other parts of the helmet to allow for air circulation and keep the wearer cool. Pith helmets became popular in the 1800s when the British troops began wearing them in tropical and arid regions around the world. They are still widely used today by people who live in the tropics, as well as by adventurers, archaeologists, missionaries, and of course, Grandpa Bruce and Dad Bruce.
That's not what I was picturing. I thought it was like an aviation helmet of some kind, but it's just like what you wore outside. Clearly it's very hot.
And it had its own air conditioning, so that's great.
All right.
With the holes.
Perfect. Well, another way that Rankin Field seems very different from Santa Ana is that Bruce seems to have a lot less free time to write here. In fact, he has to continue this August 4th letter the next day. So, Dad, why don't you keep us going here in his own words?
Wednesday, 1 o'clock. Well, I was going to mail this yesterday, but didn't have a chance to, so I'll write a few more lines. I'm on the flight line now, and so I'll have a chance to scribble a few words. We spend 4 hours a day out here, waiting to fly and watching the ships land and take off. When we get going, I'll probably fly 3 and 4 hours a day. Until then, it will only be 1 hour a day. Boy, but it's hot here. The only saving thing is that it's a dry heat, and so it doesn't bother you too much. They have salt tablets at all the drinking fountains, and the way I perspire, I use 3 or 4 tablets a day. Incidentally, all this dirt on the paper is due to the ships blowing the dust back to the line. We sit under a canopy that shades us from the sun. There's a place you can buy ice cream and soft drinks here. They won't sell Coca-Cola to the pilots until after they come down. I guess it's apt to make them sick. Seems kind of funny to sit here with 300 or 400 hours of experience when all 3 fellows, or at least most of them, are taking their first hours of instruction. Soloing isn't going to be tough for me, and this primary is just repetition of my previous experience. In basic, we'll get hotter ships, but it shouldn't be any tougher for me. With the experience I've had, all I need is to do is to try to fly the way the Army flies, and it's different from commercial flying. This letter probably doesn't follow any logical thought at all. Fellows ask me questions every minute, or some kid comes down sick, one just did, and I have to write a few words, then quit. Our mail service isn't so good on the field. The main trouble is that we don't have time to go to the CQ office for our mail. Then, too, it's hard to get a chance to mail our letters, as they have to be mailed on the other side of the field personally. The whole thing is they don't want us to spend time writing letters. They say the only time to write is on Sundays, etc. Well, that won't stop me from catching a few minutes during the week. There are no movies on the post, but we wouldn't have a chance to go if there was. I haven't even seen a newspaper since I left Santa Ana, and I've lost contact with all outside activities. From now on, I guess the only news I'll get is from your letters. By the way, don't forget to change the ledger's address, so I'll get it here. Well, so long again. All my love, J. Bruce.
That may be our longest letter yet. And he wasn't kidding about the heat. It's good to know that we get what I call the McMahon sweats from him. He's a sweater. I think so am I. So are you, Dad, right? So at one point on the letters itself, he wasn't kidding. There is a wet spot on the paper, and you can see it on the Lowell Historical Museum website, and he labels it sweat, and he draws like a little arrow to the dot, and then there is dirt on the page, like it's a different color, and you can see it. So this is why you really need to go check out the letters themselves on the Lowell Historical Museum website, because you get this added piece to it. But that did make me laugh out loud when I saw it, for sure. So now it's time to get into our segment where we talk about what was going on in the world and in Lowell in early August 1942. So we'll start with some Lowell happenings that Bruce writes about in part of another letter from August 5th. So in his own words.
Gosh, it doesn't seem time for the Parnell supper. Of course, every day is the same out here, and it's a bit difficult to realize that fall is coming on slowly but surely. That storm you must have had was really a terrible one. I bet the gang sure had a tough time of it. Dad probably weathered it in his usual cool manner. I envy him and his ability to think coolly when the going is the toughest. I guess you really had tough times in Lowell. It's certainly too bad about Perry Freeman. I knew him, and he was a swell kid. Poor Frank sure has his share of tough luck. Guess we've nothing compared to people's troubles.
So I did find Perry Freeman in the ledger, and he was a young kid, like maybe 17, I think, who died in a tractor accident. And the Frank he's referring to is that kid's dad, right? Wow. Who had so that's very sad. I could not find anything about the storm that he was referring to, so maybe it was just your average thunderstorm. But what is the Parnell supper? Was this something you guys knew about when you were kids?
Well,
I don't know.
Gail could answer it for sure. It's like a precursor to the Parnell Festival.
Okay.
There we go.
Maybe.
Which is still going on, which was
I think that was just
June 28th, 29th of this year. So
yeah, that's still going. Okay, so that was a thing back in the 40s too. Okay.
Cool.
Must be around every fall when they did that or something like that. Okay. But you didn't know about it when you were kids? Like this wasn't anything you guys went to?
Went to a lot of pancake suppers at St. Mary's, but
not at Parnell. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we probably did. I probably went out there, but I don't remember it.
Interesting. Well, on August 17th, 1942, a couple of weeks later, Bruce wrote to his parents about his trip to San Francisco. So he did manage to get a little bit of free time because he mentions in one of his letters that cadets at Rankin Field who earn high marks on exams and in flight practice can go on trips and weekend passes. So he had mentioned he had, done very well on exams. We clearly know from one of the last letters you just read that he's got plenty of hours practice, more than maybe some of the other people there. So this must have been what he did. He chose to go to San Francisco with one of his passes. So Aunt Lori, in his own words.
McCarthy and I rode up to San Francisco with one of the cadets. He has a car and only charged us $2 to ride. That's very reasonable when it would have cost us $6 a piece by train. We arrived in Frisco at about 9 and proceeded to do the town. At 11:30, we were in a hotel room, dog-tired and ready for bed. In the morning, Sunday, we went to church in the beautiful cathedral. San Francisco is predominantly Catholic. When we went out of church, a priest stopped us and told us that they had Sunday morning breakfast for Catholic soldiers, so we accepted his offer and sat down to the first home-cooked meal I've had in the Army. Homemade cinnamon rolls, bacon and eggs, pineapple juice, coffee and milk, all the butter we wanted. We sat around a while and talked to the women serving us, then one of their daughters took us out to visit the famous Golden Gate Bridge. How Dad would have enjoyed that bridge without exception. It's the greatest engineering feat in the world today. Imagine a mile of 4-lane pavement suspended above the water by huge cables. Although it's unnoticeable, it actually swings 10 feet back and forth in the wind. We took some pictures, but McCarthy got caught and they confiscated his film. I still have mine. I'll send you the pictures as soon as they're developed.
Yeah, the tone. This one's great. The tone of his letter. He was so excited about this Golden Gate Bridge that I kept thinking, like, well, what's the big deal? Like, but so when I Googled it, though, I found that it was pretty new at the time. It was. It opened in May of 1937, so it was only 5 years old at this point. So it kind of makes sense that he would be writing back like, "Oh, you've got to see this." He's very enamored with the suspension cables, but I don't know this piece about why his friend McCarthy's film would have been confiscated. Dale, what did you find out about this?
Would have been
found
a target, right? The Golden Gate.
I found out something, I don't know, but it makes sense to me. It said the U.S. War Department initially objected to the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge because it feared the Navy ships could be trapped in San Francisco Bay if the span was bombed or collapsed. The military eventually gave its approval, but it wanted the bridge to be covered in bold stripes, red and white, so it could be easily seen through the fog and stuff. So,
Is that why it's orange or red? It's sort of an orangish red today, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, that kind of made sense to me. Take the films because, if they bombed, Japan or somebody came in and bombed the bridge and there was a bunch of ships like Pearl Harbor, they would have been locked in there.
Yeah, and they don't want, or maybe they thought he was a spy, like taking pictures or something of the. That could be interesting.
Sure.
I also just love his description of this home cooked meal. That would have been probably amazing to have, like after Army food.
He gets real descriptive when it comes to food.
And butter. He liked butter.
And divinity and fudge.
Oh, we'll get to that. Yeah, he does. Yeah, he must have missed it. But yeah, all the butter you could eat, right?
And I'm sure there was dessert in there. Cinnamon rolls are on there.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's breakfast. So it's this home cooked meal.
Sugar.
So the next day, he writes a letter to Burns' family, and he's also talking about the Golden Gate Bridge in this letter. So he must be very impressed. So Aunt Lori, why don't you keep going with this one too, in his own words?
I had a swell time in San Francisco last weekend. I hope someday you can see that bridge. It's almost unbelievable. The size is beyond imagination. I just stood and looked at the darn thing for a few minutes before I could say a word. It's a cinch that the minds that made it possible have nothing in common with my 2-cycle brain.
So impressed with this. So yeah, we're going to wrap up this episode today with the ending of this letter, and the same one Aunt Lori just read, to his brother Bern, where he's talking about the bridge. I do want to say in this particular letter, probably because he's writing to his brother, right? They have a different relationship. Bruce uses some language to describe Japanese people that is offensive today and was offensive in 1942 as well. We're not going to read these words out loud, so it's not part of the letter, but we're also not going to censor them in Bruce's handwritten letter that's on the museum website, because this represents, his feelings at the time and captures like the historical record from then. I mention it now so that any listeners who are reading the letters on the museum website are aware that, we don't condone the use of the slur, and be prepared when you read it. Instead, we're just going to skip ahead of that part, and we're going to move to the end of this letter because he gets to talking about Burns' family, which is a much nicer thing to talk about. So in his own words.
Well, I guess I've rambled long enough. Tell the folks that when they say their letters aren't interesting because it's the same old thing, that they are nuts. Don't you realize that that's what makes the letters from home so important in this Army? I sure wish I could talk to you folks for about 12 hours straight. There's so much to say that I could never do it with a pen. About time for lights out, so I'll say goodnight. All my love, J. Bruce. P.S. Tell Helen that this letter is to the family, although I started with your name alone. P.S. Say hello to the Jays for me. Tell them their uncle misses them.
All right, so obviously we think the letters are important too. So Aunt Lori, what can you tell us and the listeners about Byrne and his family? Like, who is Helen? Who are the Jays? Who are these people that he's talking about?
Well, Byrne was one of Dad's brothers, and he's married to Helen, Aunt Helen. And Mitch knows more and was closer to that family just because he's older. And he was real good friends with Pat, Byrne and Helen's son. But we're about the same age, aren't you guys? About the same age.
And Byrne is just about the same age as Mike.
Okay.
We call him Buzz.
Buzz, yeah. Byrne Senior, Byrne Jr. Okay, so about the same age as Mike. And then the Jays are Jill and Judy. Yeah, and Jill was the oldest. And so, yeah, that's what he's...
And they were out of the house when I was, hanging out there. So I didn't really know them real well. I still don't know them really well.
So in 1942, though, the Jays are younger, and they're Bruce's nieces, just like Gail was, right? So they're roughly about the same age.
Yeah. Oh, and Jill is older than Gail. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's just saying, say hello to the nieces. He's being a good uncle.
There you go.
From back home. All right. Well, we have another thing on the family front. I was researching this a little bit. August 20th, 1942, and in the Ledger, it reported that several teachers in Lowell schools had resigned their posts, and some of them were because they got married, like a Jane Guy Doyle, who I'm assuming is EJ. As we know, she got married. But one of the teachers to resign was Miss Margaret Allen, which I was surprised to see, except we know she didn't get resigned to get married, so I was surprised to see that. But through another completely separate thing, so we're piecing these together, Aunt Lori thinks she discovered the reason why Grandma Maggie resigned her teaching post in 1942.
Yeah. And I saw that the address was in Ann Arbor, and I didn't know that Mom had lived in Ann Arbor, and that must be where she resigned to go help in a factory for, help me out again.
I think an aviation factory.
An aviation factory. So, in Ann Arbor, I believe. So she resigned her teaching post in Lowell and took a job for the war effort, really, like being a secretary in a factory in Ann Arbor, maybe. Yep, and there's an article. That's how I knew it, there's an article written about it. So
Never knew that.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
So it's interesting that we can find something about another thing entirely and then kind of piece these bits together of the family history. So yeah, she may be, this fall of 1942, she's on a different adventure.
Yeah,
so they don't meet up yet. We know that much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is about it for us today. Thank you for listening to Letters Home. We hope you continue to listen as we go through Bruce's story. You can listen to Letters Home on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the Lowell Historical Museum website and YouTube channel. New episodes drop every Thursday. The Lowell Historical Museum has digitized versions of Bruce's letters, so you can read them in full and see all the sweat stains, along with primary sources for most of the people, places, and events we've talked about here today, plus more. You can also follow the Lowell Historical Museum on Facebook and the Letters Home podcast on Instagram at Letters Home Lowell. Thank you, as always, to Roger McNaughton for our podcast music and to WRWW 92.3 FM for letting us record in their studio at Lowell High School every week. Tune in or stream WRWW at lowellradio.org. And big thanks to Gail for being our guest today as well. This is a great one. So see you all next time.